Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Good morning and welcome to the Grand Rapids Promise Zone Authority Board of Directors meeting. And I would ask Julie Anderson to please take the roll.
Okay. Mayor Bliss,
Yes.
Mr. Cuevas,
Present.
Mr. DeYoung,
Present.
Mr. Faber,
Here.
Dr. Gorman,
Present.
Ms. Grant,
Present.
Mr. Heisinger,
Here.
Mr. McComb,
Present.
Ms. Seeger,
Here.
Ms. Pugh Walters, and Chair Weatherall Neal.
Present. Thank you. I would like to ask for approval of the agenda that you have in front of you. So moved.
Support.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson, will you take the roll, please?
Absolutely. Mayor Bliss,
Yes.
Mr. Cuevas,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Faber,
Yes.
Dr. Gorman,
Yes.
Ms. Grant,
Yes.
Mr. Heisinger,
Yes.
Mr. McComb,
Yes.
Ms. Seeger,
Yes.
Ms. Pugh Walters,
Yes.
and Chair Weatherall Neal.
Yes. So our next order, we have minutes from our last meeting, and hopefully you had a chance to review them. And if so, I would ask for approval, a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Support.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
Mayor Bliss,
Yes.
Mr. Cuevas,
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung,
Yes.
Mr. Faber,
Yes.
Dr. Gorman,
Yes.
Ms. Grant, Mr. Heisinger,
Yes.
Mr. McComb,
Yes.
Ms. Seeger,
Yes.
Ms. Pugh Walters, and Chair Weatherall Neal.
Yes. I'd like to ask if there are any public comments, and there are cards probably right outside the door, I would imagine, if you would like to make a public comment. Seeing there are none, the next item is the business item, but we don't have anything at this meeting, so I would go right to the discussion item. And so we have an exciting discussion to have. Thank you.
Thank you. We have invited Dr. Bill Pink to come and talk to the board today, so we'll call him up now.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Pink.
I am honored to bring greetings to you from our faculty, staff, administration, and students of Grand Rapids Community College. I don't have to remind you that GRCC is the oldest community college in the state of Michigan and one of the oldest in the country, and proud to be a part of the West Michigan community, but even more importantly, proud to be a part of the Grand Rapids community. We spent the morning, starting off this morning, which is the first day of our winter semester. And as I would almost say as usual, our weather is always happy to greet our students as they come back to campus. We were out on the plaza this morning, as well as in some of our buildings, myself and our executive team handing out donuts to students, telling them welcome back. Nice. Welcome back to your future. And it's awesome to be a part of that. Not only in terms of what we do with this morning, but also to just speak to our students and hear their stories and hear what they are there for. From the 18-year-old who told me it's her first semester being back in school from Thornapple Kellogg, and she was excited because she was about 25 steps away from the building that she said, "Do you know where Cook Hall is?" I said, "Yes, you're right here." From that young lady all the way to the young lady who is 30 years old and coming back to pursue a nursing degree. And as she told me, she said, "I'm nervous." She said, "I'm old." I said, "You're really young compared to some of the other students that you're going to be with today." That's who our students are. Not only from 18 to 40, 50, and 60 years old, but also, as I say, from a 4.0 to 0.4, and every grade point in between. That's your community college. Friends, I feel like this is a historic day for us in this community to have this conversation, to have the community college president sit before you and say how excited he and his campus are of the conversation about what we do to help remove barriers from our students so they can access a higher education, but not just access a higher education, but access a quality higher education, but not just a quality higher education, to access with the hope of having success, because those things are so important. And so as we talk about this opportunity of an opportunity zone, of a promise zone for the students of the Grand Rapids Public Schools and that catchment of this district, our community college is here to not only say to you that we are fully committed to this, all the things that we do in terms of the work of our community college, not just the idea of access to our college, but all the things that that brings to the table. This institution provides a plethora of support systems to help our students in their success. We know that many of our students at GRCC are working 1, 2, 3 jobs, and sometimes working those jobs as well as trying to juggle a family, and then also that thing called college. And so the more barriers we can take off their plate, the more opportunity they have to be successful at this thing called college. And so one of the things that this conversation does, and this effort does, is that it helps take off the table one of those barriers. That barrier of just finance. That barrier of being able to access, because I will tell you that many of our students, and by the way, when you look at the data, many of the Grand Rapids Public Schools students in this catchment area, my goodness, in Kent County, many of them come to GRCC as it is. But I will tell you that our institution is about 25, this semester, we're about 25, 26% full-time. We are over 70% part-time. Why? 70+% of them going part-time because of what I mentioned earlier. They're juggling jobs, they're juggling family, and they're trying to figure out how to keep all those balls in the air. When it comes to the finance and what you're talking about doing for our children, and I call them ours, they are ours, because they come into us after Grand Rapids Public Schools. What it will do for many of them is that not only give them access, but also give them the opportunity to maybe not just take 1 or 2 classes in a semester. This will give so many of them opportunity to take now 3 or 4, to hopefully speed up that process for them so they can move on to their next. Because of the work that our institution does when it comes to not only providing an awesome workforce for West Michigan as far as talent is concerned, but also providing incredible students that transfer from us to our partners at Grand Valley State, to our partners at Ferris State, to our partners at Western Michigan, at Davenport, at all of our institutions. It provides them a pathway, but not just a pathway, but a good pathway that financially is very reachable at that point. You and I know that the data are showing us that there's about a $1 to $1.5 trillion debt when it comes to higher education in our country. I'm a deep believer that community colleges are the answer to that debt problem. And even more of an answer to that debt problem is what we're talking about today. And so I'm proud to say that our institution, with the help and through our GRCC Foundation, is proud to commit a $500,000 in scholarship for this effort, for this Promise Zone effort, to help get down the road. Because it's important to us. It was amazing to hear our foundation board, to see their reaction and saying, of course, we want to step up that way in scholarship to help our students. But also, on our part, to also be happy to help and administer this grant and administer this whole program in partnership with you as we work very closely with you. We're happy to do both of those things, friends, because it means that much to our kids, to our children. It means that much to our community. I will cut off my comments and take any questions by saying, when I think about this from the 4.5, 5 years that I've been blessed to be in Grand Rapids, and the 2.5, almost 3 years, hard to believe, almost 3 years of being president of our great college, and what I know about the history, over 100 years in this city as a community college and as a junior college, we were birthed as a part of the Grand Rapids Public Schools. We spent more time at this point, we spent more time being a part of GRPS than we have being separate from GRPS. So it makes sense that this partnership would be the integral step to giving our students an opportunity for their next. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
You'll be here for the press conference?
I certainly will.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Pink. Thank you, Lisa Freiberger, and to the foundation and to your board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have an overview of the plan that hopefully you've had an opportunity to read. We'll ask Josh to walk us through it.
Well, thank you again. Just kind of recap how we got here. We met in December, and this board asked that a development plan be drafted for a 2-year degree to GRCC, following the parameters that we worked through in that meeting, and we're going to walk through those here in a minute. So I put together a presentation of a high-level overview of the main points of the development plan, and then I want to talk a little bit about next steps and answer any questions that the board has at that point. So just to recap, the scholarship eligibility that we agreed to is this is restricted to students who reside within the boundaries of the GRPS service area and graduate from a high school located within that service area. And there's 22 of them. We'll see a list of them in a minute. Completing the FAFSA each year, and that is the federal application to access state and federal student aid. And now that's not a requirement of the actual legislation, but the legislation requires that students exhaust their federal and state-based aid before applying the scholarship. And so this is how Promise Zones satisfy that requirement. However, there are certain students that aren't eligible to submit a FAFSA form, and for those students, this requirement will be waived under the development plan. Enrolling in Grand Rapids Community College, and the award is prorated based on the length of time a student resides within the boundaries and attends an eligible school. So you see that table broken down. If you start before 11th grade, you get 100% of the scholarship benefit. Start within your 11th grade year, you get 50%, and then if you start in senior year, there is no scholarship benefit. I'm sorry, if there's any questions as we're going through too, please feel free to stop me. So these again are the 22 high schools that we reviewed within the district, and it's a blend of public charter, and private schools. Oh, yes.
I do have a question. When it comes to verification and students that are not eligible for FAFSA.
Yep.
There are some students that maybe won't even have an identification.
Yep.
And so how is GRCC going to be prepared for accepting those students?
Yep.
And being able to make them eligible for this?
Right. So if you do not have that, then you are not eligible to submit. So we're working through a process to identify when a student is not eligible to submit, doesn't have the requisite, social security number or other things. And so verification is another question. So I think it's about 20% of applications through FAFSA gets set up for verification. It gets flagged for verification where you're required to provide more information. There's a lot of debate about how that process works, and essentially some representative from GRCC called it a verification melt, where a lot of students that get flagged for that don't end up completing the requirements, because completing the FAFSA form it is onerous in itself, and then there's other requirements that are hoisted on the student. You lose some students. So we're working through a process for how the scholarship might be able to help some of those students, so that we don't lose so many through that process. So to kind of summarize, GRCC's team, so these are things that we've talked to GRCC's team about, and they're developing proposals that come back to this board for a process for how to do those things. Thank you. Thank you for that question. So eligible use of funds.
I'll also say, just because they may not complete that FAFSA of the population we're talking about, that just means that that's one avenue that they would not be able to access. Typically, we, with many of those students, find other means of trying to get them on track as far as some funding or some, whether that be scholarship, whether that be different entities within the community that would hire and also provide tuition assistance. So we, just because that person would not be eligible through those reasons for financial aid, does not necessarily mean that they may not make it to campus. We just have to try to find another method at present time.
And then if I can add to that, Dr. Pink, the onus will not just be on the shoulders of Grand Rapids Community College. There will be an appeals process through this zone, right? And so we will also work hand in hand, if that is the case for some of the students.
So to clarify, the students that are not eligible to submit would be eligible for the scholarship. So we talk about what gap is the scholarship covering. That's one of them, where if you're not eligible to access that aid, college is a further kind of thought in your mind, and this closes that gap for those students. So yes, and
So am I to understand then that whatever process you will bring back to this board, I think what I'd like to know too is that I would hope that any student that's trying to face this, and if they don't complete the FAFSA for reasons that we don't know, I hope that the GRCC and others are prepared to embrace those students so that they know that there are other resources and not just say, just to slam the door. So,
Absolutely.
We do that already.
That's right. That's great.
thank you.
thank you. So to review the use of funds, so it's for more than just tuition. So we've included books, supplies, and fees, all eligible under the legislation. And the scholarship is applied after accepting federal and state need-based aid. The student may be qualified for up to 60 credit hours, which amounts to a 2-year degree. I do want to stop. Just a lot of conversations have been happening with GRCC, one of which is this board made it clear that you wanted the scholarship to be used for certificate programs. I think most, if not all, certificate programs don't have a credit hour allocation, but GRCC is going through and assigning those, so this scholarship will be able to be used for certificate programs. Just another caveat there. Using the scholarship within 5 years, so you can be a part-time student, you can take a year off and still graduate with your 2-year degree under the scholarship. While enrolled in college, so you're not required to be continuously enrolled, but while enrolled, the requirement is to enroll in at least 6 credit hours, and that would not apply for the summer semester. And scholarship recipients must comply with the GRCC's standards for satisfactory academic progress. And that's a process that you will see in more detail as GRCC is also developing a process for that, because there's with the 5-year requirement, there's a chance that they could time out and become not eligible under the existing kind of standards. So GRCC is working through a process to ensure that all of our students aren't flagged as that just because they're fulfilling the requirements of this scholarship. And again, this board can consider appeals. And if you see in the development plan, we've left a lot of flexibility for this board to consider exceptions to these requirements. Any questions? Okay. So I want to there's going to be some reference to different entities, and I wanted to take a minute to just talk about roles overall. So this Promise Zone board is the entity that's setting the strategy, the vision for the scholarship, the parameters. It considers appeals, makes decisions on which contractors and consultants are hired. And under this proposal, there's a couple different entities that would be assisting in this. I just want to walk through and talk about some of the roles before we get to some of the costs and next steps. So there is a desire of this board to, from all of our sessions that we've had, to develop a broader framework to support students. And so we have to go through a process to determine what does that look like, because that is the mechanism through which the goals of this Promise Zone will be achieved. We know scholarships are to remove that financial barrier is important, but to really move the needle, we'll probably have to make additional investments, which are eligible under the legislation. So finding a firm, developing a scope of work and finding the right firm to do that work is going to be important, and a longer term kind of vision. So GRCC was asked by the chairperson to consider administering the scholarship, and they graciously accepted. And their expertise has been invaluable to this process as we think through what are the different kind of things we must consider, and having the capacity and the processes already in place to be ready for the class of 2020. That was really critical to move forward for the class of 2020. The GRTC Foundation was asked to consider being the fiduciary for philanthropic funds. So as we'll see the gap and the goal here in a minute. So as we go and raise the funds for those to meet that goal, the question is asked: if you're raising funds, where do I write my check to? And so that would be the GRCC Foundation if the board approves, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And they would be in charge of holding the funds, ensuring that this board and the donors are in expending those funds are fulfilled, reporting and tracking and all those things that go in with a fiduciary. So the tax increment financing captured funds would not go to the foundation. It would go through an account that's owned by this authority, and that's what GRPS, as accounting department, all Promise owns that use the authorizing entities accounting services to control those funds. Essentially, it's in and out. So they'll come in, we'll determine eligibility for students. There will be a need there that will be billed, and those funds will go out. So GRPS has offered to do that for a fee, and we'll see that in a minute. As part of that, this authority will have to do an annual audit, and that would be done coordinated through GRPS as well. More than likely, I imagine that it'll end up being a pass-through for the firm that they use for their audit as kind of a tag-on to get some savings there. Fundraising council and org development, that's us. We have to meet that goal to meet the need for the scholarship that we'll see in a minute. And so Canary Consulting is going to help through that process to identify and cultivate donors and walk this board through that process. Legal counsel, so this board will need some legal counsel. GRPS has offered to fill that role until we get a long-term partner identified that we're proposing you do through a RFP process to consider your legal counsel, as well as marketing. So longer term, you'll have to have a marketing partner that's developing and driving the marketing and messaging strategy for this, so that we hit our projections, because our projections are pretty lofty to get more students to choose this option and utilize the scholarship. And that will happen through messaging, as well as the different success messages that we want to get to the students, so that so they know this is there, that they're prepared for when they do graduate, to make the best use of the scholarship. So before we move forward, is there any questions on this slide?
Chair. So can we speak a little bit more about the student support framework and development? So with the desire to have this off the ground and ready to go for the fall, we've talked around this table that we know a lot of students, they need more than just financial support to be successful. And I know GRCC already does a lot of that work. I'm just curious if we've had some conversations about what does that look like, particularly for this first class, if we're not able to move forward on that framework and development and have something more robust in place by the fall.
So we did have that conversation with GRCC, but I think it was our first meeting, laying out, so here's kind of what we're thinking about. And one of those topics was, how can we best support this graduating class, even considering that it's 6 months away now, so what can we get in place? And above and beyond, and I've been learning more and more about GRCC's support programming, which is pretty impressive. They've committed to doing two things. The first is to offer more FAFSA nights, so that our students are going to need support. A lot of them have already been completed in the calendar, because March 1st is an important deadline for that work, but we have to expand those, because this announcement's coming out here pretty soon if the board approves. And so how do we support those students that haven't completed the FAFSA form yet, but want to utilize a scholarship? And the other one was fast track. So another thing that we're exploring is how do we expand Fast Track. It's a program that provides support for students that test in a certain range on their college entry exams in writing, reading, and math. And so students can get support and then retake those tests. So the goal is to reduce the number of students that need remediation, to use their scholarship for remediation, which takes away from credit accumulation toward a degree. So those are two things that we're working with them now to do. Now, longer term, we know it has to be more robust than that, and we have to look at the whole system and determine where there's gaps or where there might be more investment would produce an impact, and this board has to consider that work. So that's kind of the work going forward. So I think the first priority is to get up and running for class of 2020, and then also, secondary, but not that secondary, is to develop kind of a scope of work for what does a process look like that would get us there, that we can use for an RFP to find, the best partner possible. And there's some great firms nationwide that should be considered for that work.
And the other thing, Mayor, we are meeting tomorrow. There's a small group of us that's meeting tomorrow where we've worked for 30 years or so or more together around grants and programs. And so Lisa Freiberger and I will be meeting with a couple of other people where we've worked together to come up with additional ways to do that. But we do believe that each school and/or district, part of the process will be to talk to them and to really look at ways to support those students that are in need. Because it isn't just, again, on the back of community college, but it's what can we do and how can we help our children? Right? And so we will hold individual meetings to find out where the gaps are. We think it's important for the principals to have a voice as well as our counselors. There are people that are on the ground, and so we will come up with a plan to talk to those people as well.
Thank you. So getting into the projections, so again, kind of going back to our last meeting, you saw scenarios that were based on current matriculation to the entities that were presented, so GRCC being that option, that included the current matriculation. So we went back, so what, if the scholarship is put in place, what impact would that have on enrollment? And so we work with GRCC to come up with a projection for a potential increase in enrollment that we could see. So currently, about 16% of the graduated seniors from our eligible high schools are going to GRCC. That's the current matriculation. So you see the third column, graduating year. These are our graduation projections that we went through in more detail on December 3rd. And then the percent that we are, this is our assumption, the percent enrolling in GRCC of those graduating classes. So you see it goes up. And these are fairly aggressive from figures that we've seen in other communities that have promised scholarships. But we decided to take a conservative approach here to ensure that we have enough funds to meet the need. So you see the percentage as it gradually increases, as well as that kind of carried through. And a couple other assumptions here is a persistence rate of 65%. That's higher than the persistence rate for GRCC students now, but other promise programs have seen an increase in that above and beyond the college population as a whole. And you heard the percentage who enroll part-time currently in GRCC. We've assumed 40% will enroll part-time, 60% will enroll full-time of the students that enroll. Again, being more conservative to ensure that we just have more funds. And what we have seen in other promise scholarship communities is credits attempted go up. The increase in enrollment isn't as much as you would think, but the credits attempted does go up pretty substantially. So that's what we're anticipating with this population here. And so you kind of see it broke down at the bottom of the spreadsheet, full-time and part-time of the total number. And you see again, it compounds and it goes up pretty quickly because the first year it's the class of 2020, second year it's a class of 2021, and the trailing students from class of 2020, and then you assume there's some part-time students that are staying on too through the next year. So that's how that compounds. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. If you're following I got the page number at the bottom of the screen too. If you're following in your development plan as well. Page 10. So before we get into the revenue projections, there were questions last time and after the last meeting about tax increment financing and how that works and what the impact is of starting the capture this year as opposed to next year. And so I put together a slide to kind of explain that a little bit. So just the recap, the Promise Zone Authority is funded by capturing half of the incremental growth from the state education tax. And so that growth is based on when the base is set. So if the authority offers its first scholarship for the class of 2020 for the fall of 2020, the base would be 2019. And so that's the amount that's captured by the state. They capture 100% of it. So this isn't a tax increase. It's just as the trend line goes up for the taxable value, which it does go up over time, then you capture that increase. So that is the green section here. So this is 2019. If you set, then you'd capture the green, half of the green portion as it grows. So if you go 2020, then the base is set 1 year later, and you still capture, the SET growth curve doesn't change. That grows as it's going to. The difference is that you just don't capture the increase from 2019 to 2020. So using the Treasury's estimates that we'll see in a minute, that amount is about $1.2 million. So you figure you'll capture half of that. So it's just over $600,000 difference that you'll realize on an annual basis going forward by setting the base now as opposed to waiting a year, or, even further. So just wanted to give an overview of that so we're all on the same page with that, if there are any questions before we move forward. Okay. So that being said, so this is again, this is on page 11 of your development plan. This is the revenue projections for the Promise Zone Authority. So you'll see the role here is the projections for what the SET capture is for the Grand Rapids Public Schools kind of catchment area, and that was provided to us by the Treasury, as well as these. So this is the growth percentage in the third column, and this is the growth total in the third from the left column here. And so that is the amount of which you capture half of. So how the legislation is set up is the first 2 years, you fund through other sources the scholarships for the first 2 years of the Promise Scholarship. Now the authority is actually capturing funds those years. It's just, it's not released until year 3. And there's a reason for that because it lags a year. So this amount, the $1,908,000, is half of the total of these 2 beginning years. And then going forward, so this number, $1,955,000, is half of this number, $3,911,000. So you see how it kind of lags a year as you're capturing for the previous year, and then it's released to meet your need for that calendar, that school year. So that is driving the revenue side. And so on the cost side, you just want to overview some assumptions. So for tuition fees, books, supplies, for a full-time student, we're assuming just under $5,000. For a part-time student, just under $3,000. We're assuming an annual tuition growth of 3%. It has not been growing that much, but to be conservative still. And then credits attempted for part-time and full-time. Part-time per year is 18 credits per year. Full-time would be 30. And the part-time credit hour attempt, again, is probably aggressive for a part-time student, but again, we do see that credits attempted go up. So we think that some of those part-time students that might, again, have taken 1 or 2 classes might take 3 or, potentially 4, which you would potentially be in full-time at that point. The percent of students who qualify for a Pell and/or TIP is 57%, and that's based on the population data that we have from GRCC, as well as the average Pell TIP award of $2,800 is based on the current population for GRCC. And from our eligible high schools, I should say, to GRCC. So those two things together gets us this. So I'll walk through it. I know there's a lot here. So kind of the first section, and again, this is on page 12 of your development plan, is taking the full-time recipients. So it's taking the projections that we just looked at, multiplied by the tuition and fees and supplies amount to get the total for full-time students, and doing it again for part-time. So again, part-time students multiplied by the tuition, fees, books per student, equals a subtotal for part-time students. Bringing those two things together gives us the total gross tuition costs for this next year, and then we figure the Pell tip amount is subtracted from that amount before the authority is billed, and so that's how you get your annual net scholarship cost. So that's done for all, projecting out 10 years for the scholarship.
Josh,
Yes.
does the Promise Zone Authority eligibility match the other student financial aid such as the Pell Grant?
No, because so the Pell Grant would not have a resident requirement. It's not based on a length of time you've been enrolled in a certain school. It's based completely on your circumstance, your family's.
I was thinking the other way where is it possible that there'd be a shortfall in other external financing that would cause authority funding to go up?
There would be for the students that don't qualify to submit a FAFSA form. So that in those situations, you'd be meeting the full need. That's not a large percentage of student, but there are those students where the federal and state aid won't be there. There is another thing to consider, though, in this is that the requirement is not to submit your FAFSA form by any deadline. So if the student does miss the March 1 deadline, so this is again why messaging and marketing is so important, is to really push that the students complete before March 1st, because that's the deadline for state aid. And so they miss that deadline, then they don't get that aid, and that's the amount of scholarship goes up. So it's really critical that that is a push. Now, certainly for 2020, we're kind of working from behind here because we're already in January. But future years, needs to be a big push, and that's a big push for other scholarships. Like, Challenge Scholars is a big push for their program as well. So there could be that shortfall as well. So, yep. So also included in this is the admin, and these are the entities that we walked through in an earlier slide and made an assumption on each. Now, the marketing budget was based on other organizations I work with that we do these budgets quite often to allocate some for marketing. The GRCC admin fee was provided by GRCC, and we looked at, so here's what the scope is of the admin lift. This is how much we need, and there would be a position added at GRCC for administration of the scholarship. And there will be a role in this board in that process as well. The audit the cost of the audit is the cost of the audit. It was provided by GRPS, as well as their fee for handling accounting on an annual basis. And legal was based on some other budgets that we have at Canary. Put a miscellaneous in there, for there likely will be other expenses like printing and, food potentially for parent and student nights and those kind of things. Program development and evaluation, that is for the first year anyways, that's Canary. Following that really goes into what is it that we really want to do to develop out that framework. So that you think about the development plan as this is a plan for the tax increment financing funds, whereas the other work would be funded completely through philanthropic sources, and that has to be considered. But either way, going forward, there was a desire to have some kind of evaluation in place, so that would be a firm that would not be Canary, that would potentially do that work to do an annual evaluation of this program of the students. So you see the admin totals here for this table that's going to be carried forward into the next kind of summary of costs and revenue, which is coming up. So this is taking the annual scholarship costs, the admin costs. So the difference between what the cost and revenue is for these purposes is put into the college readiness costs. So, this is a true pass-through fund. So you'll have those funds to invest in those college readiness student support services as they're available after you've met your liability for scholarships. So that's the question of what are those things invested into that we have to do some more thought about and walk through a process to develop that out. So you see the variance there. Just under 2.9 million. We've rounded up on assumptions, so we've raised $3 million to meet the need over the first 5 years. And so that's where that number comes from.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Will the ongoing administrative costs, the funds for that need to be raised privately every year, or will that come from the total that's within the
So
capture?
after the second year, it would come from the capture portion. So, yeah. So, yeah. All right. So I do want to just make the board aware, there has been a anonymous benefactor who has offered to provide a impact investment, a loan, to help provide as a safety net while we raise the funds, so that we know that we can meet the need of the students. But the plan still is to raise the funds to meet this need. So, but I just want to make the board aware that that is something that you'll see more about that. That's not, there's a decision on the board to make in that, but just want to make you aware that that's out there. So at this point, I'd like to just answer any questions we have on the development plan before we kind of move into some of the next steps, many of which we've already talked about through your questions. But hearing none. So just really.
Josh, I do have a question. I
Yes.
apologize. This goes from here to the state treasury, correct? And
Yep.
we have to make sure students are filling out those FAFSAs by March 1st. How much time will it take the state treasury? And is there any chance that the state treasury is going to say no, and we will have been, in essence, kind of promising some students?
Yeah. So we have to be careful on our messaging, which we'll talk about here in a minute. What's going to happen, so that's my next slide, is the approval. If the board decides to approve the development plan today, the plan and the approving resolution will be submitted to the Treasury, who has already reviewed the draft and provided their comment, which was very minimal, just really some wording preference changes. And so they've already given one review of it. Essentially, you make these small changes, you look pretty good. They have 60 days to approve it. If they don't approve, or if they don't respond in 60 days, then it's automatically approved. They could submit comments for revisions, and then we would have to do this again. I don't anticipate that happening, since they've done their review, and so we're going to kind of try to expedite the process. They did their review of this development plan within a week, so I would hope that we'd be pretty quick on the final review as well. Maybe not a week, but maybe a couple weeks. So maybe by the end of January would be my hope. But they really do have till the middle of March to approve it. So, but we do have to be careful on messaging that it's approval but you're right. The FAFSA push is the big push right now, and since the March 1st deadline is important, but it's not going to be a requirement, we also are going to be promoting other FAFSA events that are after March 1st, just because we're on a tight timeline, and we want to make sure that that the students have the opportunity to take advantage of the scholarship.
But with or without this, we should be pushing that anyway for
Yeah.
children. They really should complete the FAFSA. They really should apply for other opportunities. There are young people out there and their parents and families who may not be aware. And children think that finances is a barrier, and it is. But in some cases, we need to do what we can to push so children know to fill out those forms.
And for that reason, when we do our evaluation, so other Promise scholarships have seen an increase of students applying that are full Pell eligible. And it's because students don't know what they qualify for
right.
sitting in their senior, so that's a phenomenon that we hope to see and will attract as part of this as well. So finalization submission, we hope it happens quicker than this timeline. Preliminary messaging. So Canary we've paid a subcontractor to come and help prepare the preliminary messaging for this, because there just wasn't time to bring on a full marketing partner, which you'll have to do. But we're going to hear about the plan in a minute from Josh Leffingwell with Well Design. But that's been developed. We've been working with GRCC, we've been working with city messaging folks, and we need to work with our other partners to get this message out and couch it for particular audiences. The scholarship administration process development is going to be ongoing. There's a lot of work to do there, and GRCC has been very gracious with their time in doing this ahead of an approved contract for services, which will be presented to this board. And for that purpose, we will have to add a February board meeting on the calendar, as well as a executive committee meeting for February, and the same for March. I envision the March board meeting as it exists will become the executive committee meeting, and then we'll have to find a later to do some of this work that we're going to talk about. So, contract services, Canary will help draft an RFP for the long-term marketing partner and legal services. I think it's pretty critical that those two things are brought on board pretty quickly to handle some of the stuff that will come up. And then the marketing branding at some point will be taken over by that new partner that's selected. So we hope that we might be able to get through a process to have that completed by March. That's probably pretty aggressive, but that's what we're going to try to go through. So you'll at the February meeting, you should be seeing an RFP to approve to move forward for both of those services. The fundraising effort will be ongoing. So you saw that the fundraise is $3 million. However, that is over 5 years. So we have to have an intentional process to identify a short list of major givers and develop a process for cultivation and asking. And we'll be asking for this board support through that process for sure. And then student supports, like I said, so there's some preliminary things that we're working through with GRCC to be ready for class of 2020. But longer term, we have to think through how are we going to develop out that framework so that there's something more robust in place that eventually you would fund you would be a primary funder of that reasonably after it's implemented. So that's kind of takes us through kind of the September board meeting, which is an important kind of milestone since your first board meeting was in September. And that'll be a busy year. So again, any questions that you have, I want to ask Josh Leffenwell from Well Designed to come up and just walk through the messaging plan and some of the stuff that they've developed already too. So you're up to speed on what the plan is on that moving forward.
Thank you.
Hello. Again, I'm Josh Leffenwell with Well Designed Studio. Canary Consulting brought us in recently to help begin developing some assets and some messaging for this Grand Rapids Promise Zone Authority Board. What we have put together and you have in front of you are initial talking points and the marketing plan. The biggest reason why we wanted to make sure that we had this ready so that if and when we were to make an announcement about this, we would all be able to communicate with students and families as quickly as possible so that we can begin getting the message out there to students and families that the scholarship is available to them and make sure that we're all speaking with one voice. The talking points are nothing more than what you all understand about the scholarship. I don't know how much we need to go through them, but please review them so that if you are asked about them, that you have the knowledge and aren't in the dark about feel unsure about anything. And we're also going to be sharing these with some partners as well who help our students. So whether that's organizations or folks who have the ear of our families, whether that is like elected leaders and other folks in our community. We want to make sure that everybody understands how exciting this is and the opportunity that our young people and our families have. The marketing plan itself is strictly a marketing plan for this first few months. We want to make sure that between now and when students graduate, they understand what opportunity they have and the ability that they have to take advantage of the scholarship. The beauty is we know exactly who our target audience is. We have 1,326 students that we're looking at, and we need to reach those students and their families to let them know that this is available. And having those numbers and having that information available helps us to understand how we can reach out to them. And the beauty of this authority and the schools that are partnering with this, the fact that we have 22 schools and all partnering together on this means that they all have their own marketing channels. They all have access to emails for all of these parents. They have access to their own social media. There should be no reason why we can't get in front of every single parent and make sure that they understand the opportunity that is in front of them. And so this marketing plan is in part to lay out how we see that process moving forward. So that's in the section called owned lists or owned media. And so that is where we're helping folks understand the opportunities that they have. Sometimes folks don't necessarily understand that this doesn't need to be that difficult. You have the emails for all the parents who are looking to graduate this year. Let's make sure they know about this. Let's be emailing them, let's be text messaging them, and let's be promoting it on our social media pages. And then we're also looking to a little bit of paid media. I know that with our limited time frame and limited budgets, a lot of the schools and partners have already set their budgets for the year. What we're hopeful that they might be able to do is help us by simply swapping out creative on some of their ad buys. So like if they have a billboard going up, we want to make sure that if they haven't already submitted the designs for it, maybe we swap some of those designs out with some that we've created that help promote the Promise Zone. Beyond that, one of the things that we also know is that you all at all the schools and with all the partnerships that you all have, there's lots of organizations and leaders in our community who will be excited to be a part of this. So how do we leverage their access to students and families to make sure that they understand this program and how to talk about this program? So making sure that we're setting up training sessions with those community partners and making sure that they have the ability to get the word out to parents and families. They should be hearing it not only from the schools, not only from the press, not only from the city itself, but they should also be hearing it from their trusted sources. So working with community partners, whether that is like actual community organizations like the Hispanic Center or the Grand Rapids Urban League or even working with some of the churches in our community, or whether that is through organizations like KSSN or some of our school organizations that are directly working with families already. Or whether that is working with our business community, so making sure that Talent 2025 feels like they're up to date and understand what opportunities they have available. So making sure that all of those folks are trained and have access to materials that are going to help students be successful. And then hosting events and making sure that those events are available for families. So whether that is GRCC's FAFSA nights, throwing more parties like that so that families understand what's necessary for them to move forward, but also working to table at events, whether that is winter and spring sports activities, whether that is, I don't know all the dances that they're doing now, but going to the school dances and all of those outreach activities, making sure that we have tables and materials for all of those students and families to have access to this information. We have a preliminary budget, although that budget is primarily just leveraging. So working with the advertising that is already available to make sure that we can swap out creative. We added an assigned value to that, but it could be triple that, or it could be half of that. It really just depends on how folks are able to help us ensure that that we can begin swapping out some of that creative to just make sure that whether it's billboards, social media ads, or otherwise are available to reach the families. The only thing that is not necessarily covered by leveraging other advertising channels is primarily the imprintables. So whether that is the pens, notebooks, those types of things, we'll have to just get some of those printed, and we're working on securing funds to be able to do those initial assets so that we can make sure that when we're tabling, we've got a little bit of that swag.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions on the initial marketing plan?
Yes, will your digital include other languages as well, or collateral pieces?
Yes. We are working currently with a Spanish language copywriter to make sure that all of our materials, including the website, social media, all of those assets are going to be bilingual. Yeah, and not just bilingual in the translation sense, but also written specific to folks speaking Spanish, specifically Spanish. That's our capabilities at this moment.
We will also work to communicate with other families as well, though.
Josh, I'm wondering too, at least for the schools, the Catholic schools that are participating, the guidance counselors would be really important contacts to get some training like ASAP. And I wonder where that falls in the process.
Perfect. Thank you for asking. That's one of the events that we're talking about. We can have external events and then internal events. Those internal events are going to be where we work with not only those counselors, but also making sure that all the principals understand what this means, helping high school teachers understand these opportunities. The more that we can put this in front of your schools to do the marketing yourselves, the more that we empower you, the better this gets in front of families. So I think that's specifically a great idea, and one that we cover a little bit in this. It doesn't actually say the word counselors, but I think that's a good addition. Any other questions?
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. We are, I would ask for an approval, a motion to approve our plan, please.
Chairperson would like to move, to approve this plan?
Thank you.
Support.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Anderson?
Take the roll. All right, Mayor Bliss?
Yes.
Mr. Cuevas?
Yes.
Mr. DeYoung?
Yes.
Mr. Faber?
Yes.
Dr. Gorman?
Yes.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Heisinger?
Yes.
Mr. McComb?
Yes.
Ms. Seeger?
Yes.
Ms. Pugh Walters?
Yes.
And Chairperson Weatherall Neal.
Yes. Thank you, Josh. I would ask if there are any public comments at this time. Again, cards are at the door if you'd like. Seeing there are none, I would ask for comments from board members. Ms. Seeger?
I have no comment.
Mr. McComb?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Faber?
I do. I just want to thank the executive committee for thinking ahead in terms of the talking points and marketing plan. Already this morning, I heard some messaging in the community that could be misleading. So having this information, I think, is really, really helpful.
Thank you. President?
No comments.
None.
Good.
Just really quickly, there was a lot of discussion about counselors and other folks who may be getting this word out. I think one group that we cannot miss, of course, are the principals and all of the programs. Principals have really loud voices in their communities, and they also have structures already in place where they address the student body. And I think that needs to happen in all of the buildings that are going to be getting these resources tomorrow. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mayor?
I'm just going to add my thanks to GRCC and to Dr. Pink. I believe that we're able to move really swiftly on this because we have this incredible community college in our city, and I know many of us over the last couple meetings, we've asked a lot of questions. You know, how can we get this off the ground and be prepared for the fall of 2020? And I believe we're able to do that because of the strong partnership we have with CC, and then also I want to say thank you for the incredible generosity with the initial gift. And making sure that as we move forward, students have the support they need to be successful. So, thank you.
I'd just like to add, I'm enthusiastic about seeing this roll out as fast as it has. Congratulations to everyone, and I'm excited just to see the commitment from GRCC. Ecstatic. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to say not only thank you to all of the board members, but especially thank you to Dr. Pink, to Lisa, and to the community board, and to the foundation. I also want to thank Diana and all of our partners at Grand Rapids Community Foundation, because we've learned a lot during the years about how to make this happen for children. We work in schools, but we've learned a lot, and we will take that learning to our next step to spread across the city. And I am really excited. I really want to thank all of the people that helped put this together. This is a heavy lift, and we've done it very, very quickly. But there's nothing we can't do, you guys, in Grand Rapids. And so for that, I say thank you. And this meeting is adjourned.